Thank you so much. Good evening. Oh, it's great to see so many old friends, and I'm just saying friends of long standing. Let me rephrase what I just said. Friends of long standing, okay? I was having a trip down memory lane as I was listening to our speakers. People talking about the Fair Housing Act. I do remember that law, and in connection with my nomination for my current job, and a state that's a cold state and a city that is a cold city but a very warm city. When I worked for Senator Kennedy, whenever it was time to debate the legal aid budget, we always did the smart thing, which is the most important thing you can have as a Senate staffer is a good Rolodex. And so we'd always bring Alan Hausman in to brief the senator on legal services. And it made my day easier. So, Alan, can you come in and I'll just sit there and listen. So many meetings with the senator, who I know is here in spirit. And when you were talking about the plaids, when I was teaching at Maryland Law School, one of my students helped out on that case. And I'll tell you, it kind of illustrates the challenges that we're confronting and continue to confront advocates in Mississippi, because I'm convinced to this day that the reason we succeeded in that is that they came to learn that most of the plaids were poor, disabled, and white. And it was only when they figured out that they were poor, disabled, and white that the issue got traction. And I say that with great regret, but I recall that vividly. And so that work there I remember vividly. I can't help but say one more thing about one more person who's here in person, and I know someone who's here in spirit, and that is our good mutual friend Ellen Weiss, who has been a big part of this, is in the back with her son David, and her husband Dan is here in spirit. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge them. Who've been big supporters. Now, I have to share with you that the last thing Martha said to me right before I walked up was, well, see, they've already spoken, so enough already. So I guess I can sit down, but not quite. You know, I couldn't help but reflect as I was listening about this to my first jobs in the legal world. I owe my first opportunities to do internships to Ronald Reagan, because many of us owe our opportunities to Ronald Reagan, because when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, one of the first things he did was dramatically cut funding for legal services. And I was a college student at the time looking for a job. And I was a Pell Grant kid, and I needed to make money, and I needed work-study jobs. And so one of my first jobs was at the Rhode Island Legal Services. And then my senior year, my work-study job was at a place called the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights. And those were two of the first places that really showed me the two Americas, or in my case, the two Rhode Islands. A Rhode Island on the rarefied air of College Hill at Brown, and then the Rhode Island for everybody else. Folks who were struggling to make ends meet, folks who were working hard and playing by the rules, but they just couldn't simply catch a break. And but for the grace of God, could have gone any of us. And my parents taught me that if you want to get to heaven, you better have letters of reference from poor people. And Martha's family and Elliot's family clearly did the same thing. Now I was 12 when my dad died, and the one thing is he never told me how many letters I needed. And so, and my mother wouldn't tell me either, because I think she wanted me to keep working. And I had the good fortune, and so because I didn't know how many letters I needed, I got a plan. And the plan was this: I need to marry a legal aid lawyer. And so the summer of '84, I met my wife, who was a legal aid lawyer in Buffalo through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And we've been married for 28 years. Her sister was also a legal aid lawyer. So now I've got all sorts of letters because I asked them to make sure they put both of us in the letter. And so that was remarkable. And the work that you have done, and Alan, and so many of you in this room, and I saw Peter Edelman in the back, and Peter was on the cover of the most recent bar journal I got from the DC bar, and Peter's not only been a friend but a mentor, not only to me, but probably to 2/3 of this room, conservatively. And people like you inspire us because, when I think about Martha, the gas is always in the tank. And here's what else I think of when I think of Martha. If you looked at the New York Times today, you will see the online version that the performance Hamilton just got nominated for 16 Tonys. I had the privilege of going to see Hamilton and the privilege of meeting Lin-Manuel. And it was cool. Let me just, someone asked me, what do you like best about your jobs? What are your perks of the jobs? And I said, well, that was one, okay, And then my kid met Big Papi, after the Red Sox won the World Series. And then I could just go home after that. But I digress. But Hamilton is really about the journey of the creation of our nation. And it is about the timeless journey to build a more perfect union. And, I have committed to memory probably 2/3 of the songs. And, after the performance, I was out to dinner with Anne-Marie, my wife, and she said, Hamilton reminded me of you. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, he was chronically impatient. And I had to plead guilty to that. And one of the lyrics goes like this. By the way, as you know, he wrote the majority of the Federalist Papers. He wrote most of them in a 6-month period. I think he wrote 51 out of 85, something like that. And one of the songs goes like this. Why do you write like you're running out of time? Why do you fight like you're running out of time? Why do you live like you're running out of time? And the reason was he was living with a sense of urgency because the great unfinished symphony, which is the United States of America, was what they were creating. And that unfinished business of building a more perfect union is that unfinished business that continues. And I think one of the reasons I found that I have been able to bond over the years with Martha and really with Elliot is because they lived their life with a healthy impatience that we all need. All of us who look out and see an America that isn't quite working for everybody. An America where down in Mississippi, kids seeking education are running out of time. Kids seeking access to health care are running out of time. People in the aftermath of Katrina are running out of time. Our LGBT brothers and sisters today are running out of time. And you used to think those things would be in the history books. Mississippi burning, you watched it and you think, oh, that's over with. Until you go and head up the Civil Rights Division, as I had the privilege of doing back in 2009. And hate crimes cases that you thought were in the history books were still on the front pages. And I got chapter and verse that I won't get into. But as you describe the work and the challenges ahead, the things that folks are running out of time on are not simply the overt acts of blatant racism embodied in the hate crimes that we continue to see in too many places across this nation, but in so many other areas. Fair housing, where we see the corrosive power of fine print that transforms the American dream into the American nightmare for so many people. And we saw that when we saw the bubble. So many African American and Latinos across this country, as a result of industry bottom feeders like Countrywide, who watched their nest egg go away. Again, discrimination with a smile, my friend Fred Freiberg would say if he were here. That's what it was. And you see it in the Plaid program, which was an effort to discriminate against black people, but it had the impact of affecting all poor people. Access to health care, we recall Dr. King's admonition, is discrimination in health care one of the most odious forms of discrimination, he said. One of the most odious forms of injustice. And the thing about Martha, for me, that is so important is, you know what? Here we are. And she's had a few years at this. And yet, she lives with the impatience of Alexander Hamilton. And she lives with that impatience because every day she wakes up with that acute understanding that too many people are running out of time. I remember vividly one of my first cases in Mississippi when I came back to my most recent job. 2 high schools, not far from each other in this community. One all black, one was integrated. And the issue was access to AP offerings and other offerings. And the school that was integrated had literally dozens of AP offerings. And the school that was segregated had virtually none. That's today's discrimination that we all too frequently see in education. And those are the things that Martha and the Mississippi Center did all the time. And what I love about Martha, and what I respect about the business model that she built, was that all too many times, we in the civil rights movement think that we know what's best for people. And it's a well-intentioned paternalism. But when I think of Martha, I first and foremost think of someone who is a good listener, a true servant leader. And you look at the agenda of the Mississippi Center for Justice as it evolved over the years. It wasn't Martha's agenda. I mean, I'm very fond of telling people that I haven't had an original idea in years. But I think that if you are a good leader, you are a good listener. And you allow your agenda, your mission, to evolve with the needs of the people that you're trying to empower. And that, for me, was one of Martha's, and continues to be one of Martha's, greatest strengths as a leader. Another strength that we all too frequently don't see in this town is the strength of humility. There's an old adage. I clerked for a judge who was one of the first women to graduate from Harvard Law School. And if we hadn't had 12 years of no Democrats in the White House beginning in '81, you would have talked about her like we talk about Sandra Day O'Connor. And the thing I loved about her the most was that she understood that it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. And that's something that Martha understands and has understood from the beginning of time. Your mother and father taught you well. Okay? That's the bottom line. They really did. And another thing that really, I think, is remarkable, and we've had this transition, is that I think the most effective leaders aspire and ascribe to what I call the irrelevance theory of leadership, in which they want to become as irrelevant as possible as soon as possible. And so they empower that next generation of leader in their office. They're not there micromanaging your briefs. They are there empowering you so that they can walk away confident in the knowledge that when they move on to the next chapter of their lives, that the place is in good hands. And I can tell you, having listened to all of you who spoke tonight, and having met others when I went down for a visit, that place is in good hands. Amen. And Lin-Manuel said, what is a legacy? A legacy is planting seeds in a garden that you sometimes do not see. And you see in all these seeds that you're planting because they're bearing fruit. And I'm confident that for many, many years to come, it's going to continue to bear fruit. And the work that you're doing and the work that you have done is bearing fruit in so many different ways. I'm proud of the fact that this president put together early on in his administration an Access to Justice office because we needed to make sure we address this issue. The scourge of the fact that you could lose your child in a custody proceeding and not have access to counsel. So many other examples of unconscionable activity with absolutely catastrophic consequences, and you don't have a right to a lawyer. And that's why I'm so excited that the president did that, and I am even more excited that the president established the White House Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable, and I'm proud that we're a member. I'm proud of the fact that we have our DOL rep here. I think she's here. I thought I saw Ariel. There he is. Okay. And Karen Lash, I know I saw it right over here, who's the director of it. Because you know what? Here's the bottom line. And here's what I will lead you with. You know, I met a guy named Randy Lewis. Randy is the CEO, or was a senior leader at Walgreens. And Randy is the father of a son with a disability. And the privilege of raising that son with a disability taught him a lot about life and about leadership. And what it taught him about life was that in the context of how we treat people with disabilities, we all too frequently focus on the first 3 letters of that word and not enough on the last 7. And so what Randy did was he singularly transformed the business model of Walgreens. So I went and visited one of their distribution centers a couple of years back in Connecticut. And 40% of the employees at that distribution center are people with disabilities, working side by side the rest of the workforce. And it is one of the most productive distribution centers in the country for Walgreens. And what he said to me really resonates with me. He said, you know, Tom, you know, you're in the government and I'm out in the private sector. And we play different instruments, but we are in the same orchestra. You know, everybody in this room may play a different instrument. You might be a John Relman from a private firm. You might be Martha from the world of everywhere. You might be somebody else from academia. You might be someone else from corporate America. You might be someone else from the feds or state or local government. But we are all playing the same instrument. We're in the same orchestra. And that orchestra is the orchestra of opportunity. And what you have done, Martha, through your work you're doing now and through every single chapter of your life, is you've not only helped thousands and thousands of people, but in so doing, you have helped to construct many, many musicians in that orchestra. And for all the people who are running out of time in this country, and there are so many, I see them in my job, day in and day out. The person who just got out of jail and has game, but no one will let him in the door. The person who is an immigrant and no one will let them in the door. They need more musicians in this orchestra. You are building that orchestra. You are the conductor of that orchestra. And it gives me great pride to call you a friend and a mentor. And it gives me even greater pride to introduce Martha Bergmark.